U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening to impose tougher sanctions on Russia. It follows Moscow's largest aerial assault on Ukraine since the war began. The CBC's Willie Lowry has more from Washington.
War in Ukraine has entered yet another devastating chapter. Russia unleashed its heaviest aerial bombardment since the conflict began, sending hundreds of drones and missiles into Ukrainian cities, killing civilians, and even striking Kyiv's government buildings for the first time. The world watched in shock as images of destruction spread, intensifying calls for stronger international action against Moscow. In Washington, former President Donald Trump responded by threatening tougher sanctions on Russia, vowing that Vladimir Putin would face consequences for what he called a reckless and barbaric escalation. But as Russia's spokesman Dmitry Peskov coolly dismissed the threat, saying no sanctions could ever alter Putin's position, the world was reminded of the stubborn realities of modern geopolitics. This is the story of Russia's deadliest strike yet, Trump's push for harsher measures, and the global struggle to deter a war that shows no sign of ending. Chapter 1: The Deadliest Night. On Sunday, Ukraine endured the heaviest bombardment of the war. Over 810 drones and 13 missiles rained down across multiple regions, overwhelming air defenses and spreading terror among civilians. Explosions rocked Kyiv, Odessa, Kharkiv, and Dnipro. The scale of the assault stunned even seasoned observers. For the first time, Ukraine's main government building in Kyiv, a symbol of national sovereignty, was hit. Fires raged through its upper floors as emergency crews scrambled to rescue survivors. Among the dead were 4 civilians, including a mother clutching her infant. Their deaths became an instant symbol of the human cost of Putin's campaign. Ukrainian officials condemned the strikes as terrorism, designed not for military gain but for breaking the will of a nation. The message was chillingly clear: Russia was escalating, signaling that no city and no building was beyond its reach. Chapter 2: Russia's Message to the World. The Kremlin framed the strikes as retaliation for what it called Ukrainian aggression in border regions. Russian media trumpeted the bombardment as proof of Moscow's military dominance, while officials dismissed Western outrage as hypocrisy. Dmitry Peskov, Putin's spokesman, was blunt. No sanctions will ever make us change the consistent position that our president has repeatedly spoken about. His words underscored a defiant Russian strategy: absorb economic pain, project strength, and wait for Western unity to fracture. For Moscow, sanctions have become the backdrop of normal life. Despite years of restrictions on banks, energy exports, and oligarch assets, Russia has survived through alternative markets, shadow trade, and closer ties with China, India, and Iran. The latest strikes were as much about demonstrating resilience as about military objectives. To Putin, escalation was both a battlefield tactic and a political signal. Russia would not be deterred. Chapter 3: Ukraine's Defiance. Even amid devastation, Ukraine responded with defiance. President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the nation from Kyiv, standing in front of the damaged government building. His message was unwavering: we will rebuild, we will resist, and Russia will pay for every life taken. Ukraine's military claimed it intercepted hundreds of drones, preventing an even greater tragedy. Crews worked around the clock to restore power and water to blacked-out cities. Volunteers delivered food and medical supplies to families huddled in shelters. For ordinary Ukrainians, survival itself became an act of resistance. The war has hardened society's resolve, binding citizens together in a shared determination to endure. Yet behind the defiance lay exhaustion. Each new wave of strikes stretches resources thinner, and the calls for more Western aid grow louder. Chapter 4: Trump's Sanctions Threat. In Washington, former President Donald Trump wasted no time responding to the attack. Speaking at a press conference, he condemned Russia's barbarism and promised that harsher sanctions were coming. While Trump has long had a complicated relationship with Putin, his remarks reflected growing political pressure to respond forcefully. He called for expanded restrictions on Russia's energy exports, tighter controls on financial networks, and measures targeting countries that help Moscow evade sanctions. Putin cannot be allowed to believe he can bomb babies and walk away without consequences, Trump declared. His words played well with hawkish Republicans and centrist Democrats alike, signaling rare bipartisan support for escalation on the economic front. But questions lingered. Would tougher sanctions actually deter Russia? Or would they simply harden Putin's resolve? Chapter 5. The Sanctions Playbook. Since 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea, sanctions have been the West's primary weapon. Banks were cut off from international systems. Oligarchs lost yachts, villas, and investments. Energy firms saw contracts collapse. Yet Russia adapted. Its economy shrank but did not collapse. Alternative trade routes flourished, with China buying oil at discounted rates and India importing record volumes of Russian energy. Domestic industries adjusted, substituting Western goods with local or Chinese alternatives. Sanctions hurt, but they didn't break Russia. Critics argue they often backfire, fueling anti-Western sentiment and punishing ordinary Russians more than elites. Supporters insist that without them, Moscow would have been even more aggressive. Trump's call for tougher measures raises a critical question. Is there anything left to sanction that would actually change Putin's behavior? Chapter 6. Europe's Dilemma. For Europe, the strikes and Trump's rhetoric bring new dilemmas. The European Union has already imposed sweeping sanctions, from banning Russian coal to capping oil prices. But unity is fragile. Countries like Hungary openly resist further measures, citing energy dependence and economic pain. The fresh bombardment in Ukraine may reignite solidarity, but the costs are steep. Energy prices remain volatile, inflation bites, and public fatigue with the war grows. Protests against high living costs in Germany, France, and Italy highlight the delicate balance between moral outrage and domestic stability. If Trump pushes for tougher sanctions, European leaders must decide whether to follow Washington's lead or pursue separate paths. Either choice will carry enormous consequences for transatlantic unity. Chapter 7. Russia's Economic Resilience. Despite predictions of collapse, Russia's economy has proven surprisingly resilient. Oil and gas revenues, redirected toward Asian markets, continue to fund the war. Parallel imports through Turkey, Central Asia, and the Gulf supply Russia with goods despite restrictions. Moscow has also weaponized its economic ties. By curbing grain exports, Russia has threatened global food security, pressuring countries in Africa and the Middle East. Each sanction, it seems, provokes a countermeasure, making the conflict as much economic as military. Trump's threat of harsher sanctions must be measured against this backdrop. If the Kremlin has already learned to survive the world's toughest restrictions, what more can the U.S. do without escalating into secondary sanctions on China and India? A step that could spark global economic chaos. Chapter 8. The Human Cost. Beyond economics and politics lies the devastating human cost. Sunday's bombardment killed 4 people, including a mother and her baby. Dozens more were injured, homes destroyed, families displaced. For survivors, life is now punctuated by sirens, blackouts, and fear. Sanctions may weaken Russia's economy, but they do nothing to stop bombs falling in real time. This reality fuels frustration in Ukraine, where citizens demand more air defense systems, more weapons, and more direct intervention from the West. Each funeral, each ruined home, deepens the moral urgency of the war. For Ukrainians, sanctions are symbolic, but weapons save lives. This growing tension between symbolic economic pressure and tangible military aid defines the West's challenge. Chapter 9. Global Reactions. The bombardment and Trump's response drew global attention. NATO allies condemned Russia's escalation, promising continued support for Ukraine. China, meanwhile, called for restraint, but quietly expanded trade with Moscow. India, balancing ties with both Washington and Moscow, urged diplomacy but avoided direct criticism of Russia. In the global south, reactions were mixed. Some nations viewed sanctions as Western double standards, questioning why wars elsewhere never sparked similar responses. Others sympathized with Ukraine but feared rising food and energy prices caused by the conflict. Trump's tough talk resonated in some capitals but also raised fears of escalation. The world faces a sobering question. How far can sanctions go before they trigger broader geopolitical and economic fallout? Chapter 10. Putin's Calculus. At the heart of the crisis lies Vladimir Putin's strategy. For him, sanctions are not deterrents, but part of a broader confrontation with the West. By escalating strikes, he signals defiance and bets that time is on Russia's side. Putin's calculus is cold but clear. Ukraine will tire, Western unity will crack, and global fatigue will eventually force negotiations on Moscow's terms. Sanctions may hurt, but survival is victory. Each drone launched, each missile fired, is a statement. Russia will not be cowed. Trump's threats, no matter how fierce, must contend with this reality. To change Putin's behavior, sanctions alone may never be enough. Chapter 11. The Road Ahead. The path forward is uncertain. Trump's push for harsher sanctions could deepen Russia's isolation, but at enormous economic cost to the world. Ukraine will continue to resist, demanding not just like symbolic measures, but real weapons and protection. Europe must weigh solidarity against survival, while Russia tightens ties with non-Western powers. The latest bombardment marks a turning point. If the world cannot deter Putin after his heaviest strike yet, what comes next? Nuclear threats? Wider wars? Or a grinding stalemate that drags on for years? Trump's threats remind us that the U.S. remains central to this conflict's outcome. But whether tougher sanctions will save lives or simply escalate the confrontation remains the question haunting Washington, Brussels, Kyiv, and Moscow alike. Russia's heaviest strikes on Ukraine have left cities in ruins, families shattered, and the world on edge. Trump's call for tougher sanctions promises action, but also raises doubts about effectiveness and consequences. Can economic punishment stop a leader who thrives on defiance? Or will it take new strategies to bring peace to Ukraine? The stakes are not just European. They are global, shaping the future of warfare, diplomacy, and democracy itself. So what do you think? Are tougher sanctions the answer? Or is the world trapped in a cycle that only military force or diplomacy can break? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dive documentaries into the battles shaping our times.